So, can you guys hear me? Is it loud enough? Too loud? Right about? Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming here. This is going to be a little different than what we usually do. It's going to be no structure, a little bit. If anybody has questions, stop me at any time. Ask whatever you want. This is going to be more like a class that you get to help teach. That's why I wanted more of the advanced engineers to come here as well, so we can all contribute. And I've never done that before, so we'll see how it goes. If it makes sense, we can keep doing that. If not, we can change the structure. So my plan is to have a series of talks about how to start an app, how to create the structure, the framework, put it in Git, add all the libraries, CocoaPod, stuff like that. Maybe design an icon, we could try that together. Learn all the tools that are involved in building an app. And eventually we can upload it to TestFlight and send it to the AppStore when we're ready. It could take a while, maybe never, I don't know, we'll see. But this is not going to be about teaching you how to write every line of code, because that could take years. So I'm expecting you to also watch dub-dub videos, read, study, learn, and come prepared for the next lesson we're going to have, because I cannot cover every topic, and I don't know every topic, so you're going to have to be your own teachers as well. So thank you for Tradesy for hosting us again, and yeah. And thanks Tradesy for the drinks and the pizza that's a little late. I'm going to take a break when it shows up. This is a little bit about the apps I worked on or contributed to or built from scratch. And we'll talk today. I created an outline. We don't have to stick to it, but a little bit about Xcode, how to use it, how to set up an account with Git, how to connect it to. Then we can add CocoaPods to it, do like a basic API layer, and codable parsing. If we want something else, if we're interested in a different topic, like I said, we could start directing towards what's important or what's more relevant to our needs. So whoever gets to participate gets to control what we're learning. Yes?
So do I need to take notes, or will we get a link to the PowerPoint so we can review it afterwards?
The PowerPoint ends here. So I'll send a link to it, and I'm recording the screen. I hope it works. We'll see. How do I get out of here? I'm recording the screen, so hopefully the audio is good. I don't know, I'm using a speaker, and it's recording from the computer, so we're going to find out. Maybe I can turn it down a little.
You ready?
Yes.
This seems like such a basic course. If you want to try and video record, I can do that.
Well, I'm recording the screen. So, do you think we need to record the video as well?
Well, we can talk about it.
It's up to you. I'm not sure we need it yet, but we can talk about that. Okay, let's get down to business. Okay, so I'm gonna use Xcode 10 Beta 4.
So you have two Xcodes.
I have a lot of Xcode. Do you want to see how many Xcodes I have? I have all the betas and all the versions that came out in the past 6 months. Yes.
So I thought the idea was you upgrade and then get it off your hard drive, the old one, so you keep having space so your thing goes fast.
If you need space, yes, delete the old versions. I think I have enough space to keep it and delete it later. Let's see. Yeah, I'm good. I got a full terabyte right here.
Oh.
So, yeah, if you're out of space, delete whatever you don't need. But I keep this one because you cannot ship apps to the App Store without the official release. You cannot create an app with beta and put it in the App Store. But if you want to learn new technologies, use new APIs, use Swift 4.2, 4.3, 5, whatever, you need Xcode beta. Until it's released, there's no way for you to interact with those new features, new APIs, without using Xcode beta. Yes?
What is 4.4 has that 4.1 doesn't?
I'm sorry, can you ask that again?
You said that the Swift 4.4 has new features.
4.4 hasn't come out. I think 4.2 is the recent one. And you can only use it with Xcode beta, Xcode 10 beta. So if you want to use the new features that came with Swift, you have to install Xcode beta.
Well, there isn't that many features between Swift 3 and 4 aside from, when you go add portable, for example, is great changes from 3 to 4. Portable.
There are a lot of features that came out. We could talk about those later if we're interested. But let's focus right now on using Xcode 10 beta. Always get the latest one. I think a week ago, beta 4 came out. You could go to the Apple website, developers.apple.com/download. Log in. Good. Let me log in with a different. Not this one. Come on. Too many accounts. Trade. There we go. Okay. So you log in and you can download Xcode directly from here. That's the only place you could and should ever get Xcode beta. Never download it anywhere else besides the official Apple website. Why? Because viruses and who knows what. Go look up Xcode Ghost and you'll know. Yes?
Does beta mean that it's a testing
Yes.
form of the app?
It's not a testing form, it's an unreleased version. It's unofficial.
Thank you.
It means that the official release that's in the App Store is the one people should be using to create apps in store. The beta one is if you want to experiment with iOS 12, for example. The only way to do it is to get the beta. So we got Xcode beta. I'm going to create a new project, all from scratch. I always do single view app because most of them have templates that we don't care about. Let's call it the SwiftCoders app. Okay, always keep unit tests checked. And make sure, all right, identifier, organization, all that is set because it's going to use that information to create the bundle ID, which we can talk about later, and it will put it in all your new files as well. Let's put it somewhere, my developer folder. Always keep Git checked here. Always use Git. Don't let me catch you not using Git. Okay, we got a project. Let's point it to a simulator. I try always to run on iPhone 10 or latest iPad as well. When the new iPad comes out without buttons, you would want to make sure your app works on that as well. Okay, so first thing we do is going to clean up a little bit. I'm going to create a new folder here. I'm going to do a new group without folder. Does anyone know the difference between these two? So if you create a new group, Xcode will move all those files to a new folder with the same name of the group. If you create a group without a folder, the files don't move. Only Xcode will manage them separately. So if I put support files here, and I look at Finder, there is no folder called support. And when I start dragging files into it, these files don't move. They don't change their location in the file system. So I can hide them, but they're still here. All those files are still visible where they were before. Why is that important? Because if you move your info playlist file, your app won't build anymore.
Say that again?
If you move that file, info.playlist, this thing, if you move it somewhere else, your app is not going to build. What else? I think everything else could be relative, but this file has a setting here, info.playlist, that tells your project where that file is sitting. If you move it, it's not sitting anywhere that the project can find. You have to update the path here. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to hide it away in a folder to get it out of our way. So we create a new project, and most of us are probably going to use CocoaPods. Not mandatory, definitely not required, but if you do use CocoaPods, we should learn how to do that. So I'm going to open the terminal. Hopefully you have CocoaPods installed, and if not, I think that's a command to install it, but I'm not going to do it because I already have it installed. I'm going to go to my folder where I created this project, and I'm going to do pod init. Now I'm going to look at the files again, and I have a new file called pod file. If I try to open it, actually I should not open that file here. Let's open it with Xcode, because I don't want text edit to modify my file badly. Okay, so what we're looking at is a pod file, a CocoaPod file, to help us decide what kind of third-party libraries we want to include in our project. You can set the platform to iOS 11. If you're starting a new app, I don't see a point supporting anything before iOS 11, just so you know. So we're going to support iOS 11, and if I had started this app in a month from now, I might only support iOS 12, because this app is going to be released after 12 is out. So we got to make sure we work on Xcode beta so that our app works on iOS 12 and all the new features that come with it. Always build for the future. Don't build something with APIs from 5 years ago, because I don't know, why would you do that? Okay, I'm cleaning up a little bit of all these are just comments. And let's add our first pod. I'm going to add Moya just to show you what it looks like. We're not going to use it just yet. But I added a pod called Moya. I saved the file, and I'm going to go and say pod install. And it's going to add Moya and all of its dependencies. So Moya is a library to manage your API, and it's built upon Almofire. So Almofire is a requirement, and Result, which is another library that Almofire is using. So if I close this file now, and I look again, I see I have a workspace. I need to open this workspace. Once CocoaPods integrates into your project, you need to use the workspace that has the CocoaPods project with it. Now we get that, we can go into our view controller, and it was created for us. If you want, you can import Moya right here. Back 10. There we go. I'm gonna build it. That's, yes, questions?
Yeah, what's the benefit of using Moya over just Almofire?
So Moya is a wrapper for Almofire. Almofire is a wrapper for URL session. They're just levels of abstraction. They make your life easier. They make you write less code and abstract away all the logic of making API calls. You don't have to use Moya. You can use Elemify directly, or you can use URL session, which is what we're going to do, at least for the beginning. Okay.
Is there a performance hit?
I'm sorry?
Is there a performance hit using wrappers like that?
I don't think there's a lot of difference in performance unless you're running like a very specialized app. Your app ships with more libraries, a little more code. It's going to be a little more inflated. But performance-wise, I don't think you're going to notice a difference unless anybody else has more experience than me with that.
You
Maybe
should
Josh.
consider that your network requests take on the order of seconds or fractions of a second, and that's an eternity of computer time. So whatever you're paying for, Elemify or Moya is like,
It's a correction. We can't get that.
Yeah, so performance is not very important.
it's completely negligible.
Okay, so,
Can I ask you,
yeah.
what do you do about the commit? In other words, do you incorporate the whole block project in the repository, or do you only commit the Git, the block file?
I would not add pods to your project. They should be available online, and you want to update them as soon as you can. So if you integrate them into your Git repository, you're just inflating it for no reason. It makes it hard for you to commit things because it's going to take longer to upload all these files. And these files might change frequently every time you update your pods. I don't see a need to do that because they're all hosted on Git. So they're out there for you. You don't have to store them locally as well or store them on Git on top of that.
So do you commit the block file or not?
The pod file you commit, not the project, not the pod project. The pod file is a file that defines what libraries are included. So you want to commit it because you want to keep the list of libraries included in your project, but not the libraries themselves. Does that make sense?
Yes, so the Git local repository is where? Inside the SwiftCoders project folder, or is it
Yes.
one level up?
No, it lives in the SwiftCoders project folder. Yes. Okay, so talking about Git. Next thing we want to do, we have a master branch here, but it's only stored locally on our computer. The next thing we want to do is push it to Git. So what you're going to do is you add a source control account here. If you have a GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, this is all pretty fresh with Xcode 10. So you can sign up for GitHub and put your account information here. Xcode will let you generate your SSH keys, which is nice. We can talk about that later if we want. And then we want to add a remote. That means we can push our changes to GitHub remotely. And then when our computer burns down, we could go, oh, our pizza's here, hold on. Okay.
You know that problems with using Xcode for source control?
It's okay. It's mediocre at best, but it works. So if that's good enough for you, you could use Xcode. If not, you could use SourceTree. That's also free. Gitkraken is nice, or you can do it all in Git itself. You could do PRs and merge everything directly from GitHub.com. Yes, more questions? Let's move forward, and then if you have more questions after what I'm doing, we could talk about that. So I'm going to create a remote in GitHub. Let's do that. I'm right-clicking remotes and create SwiftCoders app remote. It's going to ask me where to create it. So I'm going to pick. I only have one account. Makes it easy. I have multiple repositories on GitHub. or multiple organizations, I'm going to put the SwiftCoders one and make it public and create it. Pushing. There we go. So if we go to github.com, come on. Why am I logged out? Oh, I know why. I was in a private browsing session. Okay, cool. So let's switch to SwiftCoders. And there it is. Our SwiftCoders app is right there. Empty from 12 minutes ago, created it. There's nothing here yet. But now, everybody who wants to see my code, contribute, and add more features can go ahead, download it, and create their own branches. The next thing I'm going to do is git ignore Swift. Let's add a git ignore file. So git ignore is a file that lists all the possible files that are in your project that you don't want to commit to Git. So I'm going to go back to the terminal, go to our Swift, and I'm going to touch git ignore. Open that file, paste it, save it, and we're good to go. I just looked up the word git ignore Swift, and GitHub has a list of git ignore files that you could use for different languages and projects. So I just copied and pasted it. And what we're seeing here, it's not gonna commit any of the user setting files, build, derived data, stuff that you don't want to save. What else is here? Stuff like that. It's not going to save any playgrounds that we created in a project. It's not going to add Carthage or CocoaPod files. If we have a CocoaPods folder, we want to ignore it here. Stuff like that. This is pretty nice. And now we can go back to our project and look at that awesome creation that we did. We can try to commit things. So we can commit our pod file, add it to the project. The podfile.log is the file that keeps the list of our versions of libraries that we're using currently. You want to keep that because at some point the library is going to update and it might break your project. So you need to know what version you have so that you don't lose your code because the library changed and all of a sudden your project can't build anymore. So make sure you commit your podfile.log as well. I'm just going to ignore the pods. And I'm not going to commit anything yet. But now we can move on to the next step. Let's see. Oh, exception breakpoint. So this is something a lot of people are not aware of. But when your app experiences an exception, a crash, something doesn't work, you can't see where it's coming from. It's just going to throw your app, throw your code out, and you don't know what the problem is. You can look at the stack, the call stack, and maybe understand, but you won't know what line of code it came from. So the first thing you want to do is just create a exception breakpoint that catches everything. Everything in your project will now break as soon as an exception is thrown. And you could go and see which line of code triggered that exception.
How do you get that?
What's that? I hit the plus right here, added an exception, and that's it. Just keep it there, always.
Okay, so this is in the
This is in the
breakpoints.
breakpoints. Yes, correct. That's it. It's in the breakpoints that create a new breakpoint. Okay, so now let's do some coding. Or should we take a break and eat pizza? Pizza. Okay, cool. 10 minutes, 5 minutes, pizza, and then we're back.
Yes, privately and very public. Nobody can see it.
I mean, you could pour out another one too. You still have to. Of course, all the
Did you say that there's not so much changes from versus the
it's not adding value. Exactly. Yeah. I'm surprised on all the questions.
Yeah, it's not there's not the point where there's not.
But some reason.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go for it. I remember when I put the change to Github and it's changed everything. I had a great record. Just really sad too.
That's before my list. You see that I have this one.
I'm very on the fence about performing. The problem is with the top sort of programmers, a lot of things inside of other things. Yeah. But these puzzle photos are
Multiple basically is a way to serialize network visualize. So let's say you have model of the backend. When you use this, it's possible to automatically retain. So it's nice to create a model. Automatically convert that data to your model.
There is a request to return your structure instead of yes. Oh, so the traffic already.
You don't do class. You can't say that. You're still traffic. I mean, otherwise you don't, let's say, every time you want to do some dictionary, you want to provide the keys and kind of value and but in that case, you already have a model to
That's why I have to take
That might be the
Yeah.
Testing, 1, 2. Can you hear me fine? I think you might be speaking too close to the mic.
Maybe?
Yeah, try it.
I know, it's kind of stuck to my face.
Yeah.
Okay, grab your pizzas, sit down. Let's write some code. Who likes writing code? Wave your pizza. If you like Swift, put your pizza up in the air. That's all? This is a SwiftCoders meetup, guys. Oh, it's the pizza meetup. That's true too. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I think we're good. Okay. So, I thought we could start by creating an API layer, exploring a little bit about what NSURL session looks like. Does that sound interesting, or do we want to do something else?
Sounds good.
Okay, cool.
What's the alternative?
I have no idea. We're making an app from nothing, so we could do whatever we want. Yeah.
Can you push that so we can push it forward?
Can I what?
Push it again.
It is. We just pushed it.
All your current changes?
Well, I haven't made many changes yet, but we could commit and push them if we want to. Let's commit that stuff and that stuff, and I don't need the workspace. Okay, so add git ignore and push it to master. Pushing. There we go. Okay, pushed. So let's start by creating a new API. I was playing with the Meetup API today. Where are you? There we go. I created a temporary account and got myself an API key. I gotta log in again. Okay, there we go. So I created a temporary account, got an API key, and decided I want to play with some requests. So let's see. For example, I sign up and then connected myself or add whatever to our two Learn Swift LA and SwiftCoder groups. So there's a API that tells you what groups you're looking at. You could try it in the console. Show response, let's see. Oh, and we got a response with an array, and object number 1, the first one, is SwiftCoders LA. If I scroll down a little bit, find object number 2. Where is it? There it is. Learn Swift LA. So let's do two things. Make that API call, this one, and also decode that JSON structure into a real object. Have you done that before? Who used Codable in the audience? Put your hands up in the air. Anybody used Codable? Okay, cool. I guess a lot of people are going to be learning Codable for the first time. So let's start by creating a Meetup API file. Put it up here. And I'm going to create a struct called Meetup API. And we're going to have a function. Okay, let's first put the private static. I'm going to put the API key here. API key. so that we can make some API calls. And then I'm going to add a static function that gets us get groups. And it's an asynchronous call. Network calls are asynchronous. So we need to use a completion handler, closure, because we can't return results immediately. We're going to have to return them later. So I'm going to create a closure that returns an array of something. Does not exist yet. So I'm going to put string here. And now we need to create a group, a meetup group that we can return. So let's create a model file as well. A model. And we can create a meetup group or just group. Let's call it meetup group just to be consistent. And it's going to be a codable. What does that mean? Magic. It can convert itself back from and to JSON without us doing anything. Just telling it to convert or encode itself and it'll just work. So let's look at our meetup object and see what we're interested in decoding. Let's take the name of type string. I don't know about status if we care about it. URL name, we need that for later. So I'm just gonna save that as well. What else do we have? City. Do we want the city? Sure. And what else? Members. Members. So it's important to remember that the names you put here have to match these names exactly, or it's not going to work. Why? Because magic. Things work if we make sure they are set up correctly.
Do you mean match what's in that list?
Yes, it has to be the same name.
But
It doesn't have to be everything. We can only get what we want and throw the rest away. But we have to make the names match. So I wanted to show you something. I'm looking at these ones. So we have objects here that have an underscore. But in Swift, we don't really use underscore for our properties. What do we do? Does anybody have an idea? What's that? Camel case, that's true. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to solve it. Let's take one. We don't need the group photo yet. Okay, let's do it so you can see what it looks like. I'm going to create another struct called group photo. Let's call it photo for now. That has ID, photo link, thumb link. So let's put photo link, type URL, and I'm going to make this camel case, and I'm going to show you how smart Codable is if you just make things, if you just set things up properly, it should just do the work for you. So I'm creating a struct here called photo that has two URLs to a thumb photo and a full-size photo. And then I'm going to create a property that points to that struct, make that struct codable as well. Once everything is codable, it'll just work. Let's see how that happens. I'm going to return a meetup group here, an array of meetup groups, because that's what the API gives us back. It's an array. This is index number 0, the first one. So the URL of this this API is this thing plus self.group. We can copy that from right here. So I'm going to take this URL. Okay, and create a URL components from it, and I'll show you in a second why I'm creating URL components. Does anybody have a clue why I'm doing URL components? Actually, gonna make it a var. Yes, I'm going to add query items to it. And the query item that we need to put is our API key. It's in the documentation. It's not showing up here. So what we need to do is, let's see if it tells us, it doesn't say it, documentation, authentication. If you go here and look at API key, there's a lot to read. I don't care about that. Okay, this is the name. I just gotta put a property called key. Okay, query item. Let's create a query item called key, and the value would be, we don't even need that, API key. Is that build? No, I think we need meetup API here. Okay, so I created the components, and instead of me doing the work myself and adding something like this, I let URL components do that for me. And then components is going to give me back a URL structured that contains all the query items, all the different properties that I'm trying to fetch or send to the server. So what I'm doing here, if I put something invalid, it's going to return nil. So I'm unwrapping it. And just to be sure that our call works, I'm just going to call completion here and send an empty array back. So if it fails for any reason, we're not going to throw, we're not going to stop our code, we're going to return an empty array. And if we want to, in the future, add errors to it, we could do that too. But that's not important right now. I'm not interested in that. Now, I'm going to create a new URL session that uses the default configuration. This is URL session. This is basic stuff. You have to use URL session and learn how to use it. If you don't know what it is, go read about it. I'm going to use it now, but I'm not going to explain everything. But URL session is very important for any app that you build that has network connectivity, that has to make calls to anything. Download, upload, all that happens with URL session. Yes?
So what about if you want to put a link in like a nav bar?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have to code a URL session for it?
No, that is a different object. If you want to put a link and open a website, you could use Safari. Safari View Controller can do that for you. Okay, I'm going to make a data task with the URL session that I just created and handle the result, response, error. Now, I'm not going to look at the error, and I'm actually not going to look at the response for now, so we can ignore those two by doing this. I'm going to remove that as well. And the last thing we have to remember when we create a data task, and I forget it a lot, we have to call resume. I don't know what we're resuming because we never started it. Apple needs to rethink their naming convention. But resume will kick off the data task. Without that, you're going to create it, and it's never going to happen. It's never going to get called. So remember to call resume on your data task. Remember to call resume on your data task. I'm going to say it multiple times until you know it for sure. Always call resume on your data task, or it's not going to work. Okay, now, I want to make sure that things work. Now, it might not work. We're debugging, writing code live, so we're going to witness the process of writing an app, a real app for production. I'm not reading it from anywhere. I don't have papers. I don't have code that I'm copying and pasting. This is how we usually write code. We don't copy and paste. We don't copy it from somewhere else or have pages or a book. We write code because we're engineers and that's our job. So if things don't work or if you see me make mistakes, let me know. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing we did here. Once we return with our data, we're going to make sure something came back. If something did not come back, we did something wrong. I messed it up. And we're going to have to figure out what's not working. I could bring the error back and print it, look at the response. Now, this closure, the completion, is being trapped by another closure. This is another closure. So what this error is telling me is that my closure is not escaping. That means that it's not being called directly. Somebody else is storing it and calling it later. So I have to explicitly tell it that it is escaping. What does that mean? It's not important right now, but when you're calling a closure from a different closure, it needs to know if that closure can escape or not. It has implications that we could talk about them later, but they're not relevant for what we're doing right now. Okay, I'm guarding my data. If I don't have any data, we're going to stop here and return an empty array again. Now let's do something with this data. What I'm going to do is create a decoder. I'm going to make it static so we can reuse it later. And it's going to be a JSON decoder because our API is going to send us JSON back. Let's go and find that. There it is. Self.groups is going to give me, let's go in console. Let's just call it the way it is. It's just going to give me 2 JSON structures in an array. So what I'm doing right here, this is actually pretty cool stuff. You should also be doing that as well. I'm creating a static object in this struct that everybody can access in this struct because it's private, and I'm initializing it with a closure. This is where the closure is set up, and this is where I'm executing it. So I'm gonna create this decoder and then return it. It's like a function, basically. It's an anonymous function. That's what closures are. It doesn't have a name. It gets called and it disappears. Nobody's keeping it. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna make our keys convert themselves automatically from snake case to camel case. Am I doing it? This is snake case, right? And this is camel case. Where is our model object? So group photo is going to be converted automatically by our decoder from one name to another, and that's how the mapping is going to work magically for us. Pretty cool stuff. Codable is definitely something everybody should be using today.
Say,
Yes?
you're not making the decoder just a static property because you don't want to reuse it, correct?
I am making it static because I am going to reuse it.
Oh, right. So the reason for that block is so that you can set the strategy.
The reason for the block is because I'm executing more than this. I need to make a change to it. You can't write code in an initializer, so you have to put a closure over here. Otherwise, I would just made it this equals this and get over with. But I want to set this for everyone. So all the future API calls are going to use the same decoder, and they're all going to have the same settings, the same global settings. And you could set the way it parses times and dates and other objects. So if you manipulate other things using your decoder, and you want to keep that identical for all your objects, which you should, because it makes sense for all your objects to be in the same format, you would put it in one place and make sure everybody shares that functionality. Okay, let's take our decoder and decode. I want to grab an array of meetup groups. So let's take this array, put it here. So the decoder is asking me, what am I decoding? What type am I decoding? I'm not decoding an array, I'm decoding a type of an array. That's what this self means. And what is our data? This is what we got back from our data task. We called data task with URL and it gave us data back. So we're going to call the coder with meetup group out of the data. And this can throw. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a try question mark in front of it. It means if you have an exception, give me nil back. So let's put the results back here, or result, whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to not return, call the completion handler with the result or an empty array. If this does not succeed, return an empty array. Easy enough. And you should think about, if you work with collections, think about what an empty value is. A nil represents an object that does not exist. But does nil make sense for arrays? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. In my case, an empty array and nil represent the same thing, so there's no point in having an optional array returned from this method. But in other places, it might make sense to use nil. It's up to you, but just make sure you're not complicating your code for no reason. Okay, this is our first API call. I don't know if it works, let's try it. I'm going to go to our view controller, open our meetup API, call get groups. Let's see what happens. If it doesn't work, we can do some debug together. It'll be fun. Where is our, there you are. Let's kill some stuff. To make sure I'm not killing my computer. Okay, running. There we go. Oof, a lot of logs. And if you look up, we printed SwiftCoders.app meetup group, and we got back SwiftCoders LA. This is an internal name for meetup. In Los Angeles, we have 531 people in the group. I wonder how many people RSVP to this meetup. Do we want to find out? So this worked. Let's add another one, and then we can see how our APIs connect to each other. So,
Can I ask you?
Yes.
You do not have to be logged in for a specific user.
Yes,
And how do you facilitate that?
I create a new account, exactly, and I got an API key for this account.
But doesn't that imply that each user of the iOS has to have their own API key?
No, because you can authenticate with OpenAuth. So we haven't implemented it. It's a lot more than the scope of this lesson, but using OpenAuth, a user can put in their user and password, or email and password, log in, and get their own key that represents their account. But what I did is I make it shorter. I made it shorter because I don't want to implement OpenAuth right now. It seems a little more than we should do on the first class. But now that our app is on GitHub, anyone who wants to do it can go ahead, fork it, and that's one of the things we want to encourage with this project. I want you guys to fork it, implement OpenAuth, open a PR, and maybe if everything works out, we can merge it back and everybody can enjoy your code and use OpenAuth to see their meetups. But for now, we're only going to see meetups that are associated with my API key. So the next thing I want to do, let's go back. So I pulled up all the groups. And if we look at the result, that's pretty cool. We have SwiftCoders LA, and we have Learn Swift LA. These are the two meetups I signed up for. Now let's look at the data in those meetups. I want to see which events those meetups have set up for them. So I'm looking at V3 events. The first one is get events. Okay. And that requires a URL name. So let's take, remember I told you we're going to need that URL name because it's different than this. So let's take this URL name. We don't need, okay, whatever. So I'm going to put it here. delete that. And let's see what happens. There we go. Ooh, this looks familiar. So we got the event for the meetup that is happening right now. This is pretty cool. And it's even telling me which group it's associated with. So should we write an API that fetches this one as well? And see how we could take a parameter from one API call and pass it down to the next one? Okay, let's create a new API. So when we talk about Moya, you're going to understand how it saves you a lot of work. But right now, I copied and pasted everything I did here. And instead of a meetup group, I want to return a list of events. But these events are associated with a group, so we're going to have to take that group in as a parameter. So we know which group we're fetching events for. So let's do that too. We don't have a event group object, so let's go and create that one. Make it codable, don't forget. And let's see what information we have. We have the name. And I'm gonna make it shorter here, but we should clean it up later. I got the name, the status, duration, I think that's in milliseconds maybe, or seconds. Milliseconds, right? UFC offset updated. I'm not interested in those stuff. Okay, RSVP count. That seems interesting. So actually this is not a string. So these two are strings, and this one is an int. Now we need to convert it from camel case, from snake case to camel case, so that our decoder can read that information. What else do we have here? We care about link, description, in HTML format. We don't care about that now. Let's just keep it simple. So I don't like doing that, so I'm just going to do that. Okay, we created our event group, and it's codable, so it should just work, right? Does anybody wonder if it's going to work or not? Okay, let's look at the format of this URL. It takes a URL name, which is the name of the group, / events. So let's take this, put it over here, and replace this URL name with an actual one. URL name that we got from the group. And here we're going to create the actual component, the actual URL is going to be called. Add the API key for sure, because you can't make a call without the API key. And if you could see, there's a pattern here. I hope you guys can see it, but I just copied and pasted everything and changed one thing in the code. Now everything else is the same, and the last thing I'm going to change here is event group. And I'm doing exactly the same thing. Yes?
So this is great. It's great how you look at the code and it's clean and it's readable. But so far you were just pulling data. So I'm guessing I haven't played with code yet. But I'm guessing you can pass parameters as well, right?
To what? You're asking about passing parameters to codable?
Like post, for example, or
Oh, we're actually doing that. We haven't set our request, our URL request to be post, but we are passing parameters. You would do it the same way. These query items, for example, could be easily be set into a URL request instead of a URL components.
so
We're not doing posts yet, but if you create a URL request, or HTTP request actually, HTTP request, right? What's the name of this mutable? I forgot, we need to look into it. But there's a place for you to set those parameters in a very similar way.
I want to query for users that are above a certain age. below, say from 20 to 50.
Yeah, we have those right here. We could, in the get itself, we can set other parameters. I only want to get events that are in status active, for example, or that have this description, or limit the amount of fields that we want to get. We could do all that right here. Now we're just sending the key, but we can send whatever we want to filter our response or to manipulate it in a way. You can tell it to come back in a different format. You can tell it to limit your results to only 20, only the first one or the first 20 if you have 100. So we can do all that right here. We can just add more query items.
I see. So basically, you just put a comma and then you just write pages, and then you would write 20 or.
Yeah, your query item and pages. What is it? Page 20. Page 20. There we go. We sent it. Now it's gonna do it for us automatically. It has its own defaults if you don't send it. So we don't have to do that. But we could do that if we want to. This is well structured to do whatever we want it to do. And if you need to send something from outside, you just add it here and pass it down. Okay, so we set up the same thing. We are making an API call and returning back an array of groups. Now let's find where we're returning our groups. And instead of printing our groups, let's do another API call, get events for, and let's just, let's take group number 1 and print the events that we got back. No, I don't know why it's doing that, but I want a trailing closure right here. Okay, so put a breakpoint here and start again. And when we get back our groups, we're immediately going to make another call to fetch back the events. We get one event, let's open it, see what it looks like. Oh, we got 0 to AppStore, Kickoff and Basics, upcoming. Well, it's not that sophisticated, I guess. And we have 36 RSVPs. So we could get live data right now just by writing, I don't know, how many lines of code did we write? Is what 10 line of codes here, maybe 20 here, and a little bit more here. Let's say 50. So in less than 100 lines of code, we connected to our meetup and fetched information super easily. This is what an API would look like, but if you have sharp eyes, and I hope you all do, we've been repeating a lot of things here. Now there are different ways we can solve it. We can create a utility that takes a type and maybe a URL and does the parsing for us. This is what we're doing here. We can use generics for that, or we can create a meetup API that uses Moya, for example, that does all that work for us. All we have to give it is the API and a little bit more data, and it will handle things for us. So let's take a vote. Do we want to refactor this with generics, or do we want to look at Moya? Moya, put your hands up. Everybody who wants to try Moya, put your hands up in the air. Anybody who wants to do some generics? Okay, well, okay, let's figure it out. I haven't done that in a while, so let's see. Let's copy what we have now and see how we can rewrite that in generics. I might need your help because I haven't done that in a long time. So let's start simple. We're just going to call it a get, and we don't know what we're getting yet. So we're going to create a generic type here that has to be codable because we want to, at least it has to be decodable. Let's start simple. Has to be a decodable type. You know what, let's make it D. So this get method takes an object that is decodable. And instead of our meetup group type, we're going to use D instead. You know what? Let's give it a meaningful name. What should we call it instead of D? Data? Okay. Data.
Data is a Swift type.
Oh, that's true. So not data. You're correct. Let's call it decoded. Okay. Done. This is hard. Naming is hard. Okay. The next thing is we don't want our URL to be hard-coded. So we're gonna keep a part of our URL, this part of it, somewhere else, static, for example, private static let base URL. Put it here. Oh. Here. There we go. So that we don't have to copy and paste this every time. And then what we will take is the suffix, the other half of that URL. So I'm going to call it endpoint, or anybody who has a different name, feel free to contribute. And what we're going to do is combine those strings. So we're going to take our base URL and combine it with our endpoint and create a component from it. Now, we should pass that slash in. Either put it here or we'll send it in our endpoint. We should not be appending characters here because nobody can see it. Now, remove those. If I see those in your code, you failed. We have to guard every time we get an optional. Unless we need an optional. But if we want to access that type, we need to unwrap it. So your code might look a little tedious with guards. If you can chain them, great. I cannot chain those here because I have to set it in between. But I like to compress my code a little bit too. So I like to do that. You could, I bet you never saw that in Swift, right? Yes, you could do that. And even you can put it in one line like this. I like to do that. This is my my personal style. Don't feel obligated to do that too. So I'm taking all the code that repeats itself. I'm going to compress it as much as I can. You know what, this feels good in one line too. So I'm going to compress my code as much as possible to make it, sometimes it's more readable, sometimes I just want to hide it away. And
before you write more completion handlers, I would suggest returning a result.
yes, I haven't gone there yet. It complicates the code a little bit, but that's true. I haven't gotten there yet. We'll get there. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to simplify it, and little by little we can build on top of it. I just want to build the basic before we can add more complexity. So I'm not returning an array anymore. Why? Because sometimes you just get one object. So if you want to get an array back, you're going to have to pass a type of array into the generic to make it work. So I'm going to make this optional, and then I can return nil here, because this is not an array anymore. And in the future, we can return a result type, which is an enum that contains either a successful data or a failed result with an error. That's a good point. But we're not there yet. We'll get there. Maybe today, maybe next time. So there we go. I abstracted our code as much as possible. And now the decoder wants to take something back. It wants to know what type it is. So I'm going to use that generic type that we sent it back. And let's build it and see if it works. Oh, succeeded. Okay, so what we did here, I'm going to make this private because I want to, well, it depends on our approach, but I would usually want to create that as private and then have other methods wrap it. So what we're doing here, we don't need this code anymore because we just abstracted it away. What we do need is this, self.groups. So that's self/groups. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to call this get with our endpoint that I just took away, and I'm going to pass our completion over. Why is that not working? What am I missing here? Oh, this is not the same type. This has to be optional, right? No. What am I missing? Help me out. Oh, okay. No, we're good. Okay. So I actually don't want this to be an optional. I want to keep it as an empty array. So I'm just gonna result. I'm just going to call the completion with the result or an empty array. Does that make sense? So instead of passing the completion over, I'm handling it, and I'm taking the type, and I'm doing what we did before. And if it's optional, it means it failed for some reason. I'm just going to return an empty array so that it doesn't break our other implementation. Now it doesn't break anymore. It broke before because it didn't expect to get an optional here. So let's look at our view controller. This broke because this was not supposed to be an optional. It was supposed to be an array. Now I'm going to do exactly the same thing over here, and then we can test our code. I'm going to take this, cut it away, and then do get endpoint, and implement the completion, just like this. There we go. Close this call. Nice. So potentially, if we want, we can override or overload this one and have another one that takes an array. And then instead of returning an optional, we can return an array and then have this be handled automatically for all of our calls that take an array as well. Does that make sense? What I can do is overload, meaning I can implement the same method with the same name with different properties. So instead of decoded optional, I could do decoded array and then call get endpoint, this one with the optional, pass on the endpoint, and then in the completion, decoded, I can call the completion with a decoded or an empty array. Then I don't have to do that anymore. But here, I can call completion and pass our completion.
So does this overloading work because the array of the codable is decodable itself? Or?
Yeah.
Arrays are implicitly decodables too. Yes, thanks to Swift 4.1 or 2, now you can make arrays decodable. Well, I think they were hard-coded in the first iteration of Codable, that arrays conform to Codable. But now with Swift, you can put it in an extension or have it implicitly conform to decodable, to equatable. Things like that are now super easy with Swift 4.2. Now, if you notice, our code did not break at all. First of all, that means we abstracted it very well, that we could change our functions and still get them to work. And we reduced the amount of code that we're going to write in the future whenever we add new API calls. Now, we only do gets here. We haven't done any posts, but we don't need to. So don't implement code that you don't need. Rule number 1, don't solve problems that don't exist. As long as you don't need to do posts, don't create a complex function that handles posts. Now let's run it and see if it works or if it broke something. I don't know. I'm writing this code on the fly, so I have no idea if it works. Oh, there we go. So it keeps working. We got back an array of events that has only one. Now we can actually do something nicer. And instead of calling group 0 and group 1, I can do some cool stuff. Do it for each year. And then take this and send in the group. There we go. So what we're doing here is getting the groups, and it gets a little ugly. That's when you start refactoring your code. But we get the groups here, and for every group, we're going to loop using a for each loop. That's a functional method. For every loop, I'm going to perform a get event. So in the first iteration, I'm going to get group 0 and then group 1. Let's run it and see what it prints. There we go. There's a lot of log here. We should be able to disable that later. But yeah, for SwiftCoders, this is messy. We can pause it. Let's run again. It'll be easier to see it over here. Cool. Okay. So this is for SwiftCoders. We got this event, and the next time we got Casual Swift and Lost Phillies. Let's open all of them. Ooh. We have a repeating event, I can see, and people are already RSVPing. I should have a method that divides the RSVP count by half every time you print it. Right. I think meetups should pay me for that. Okay, we build our API layer. We use generics. We use URL session. And we did it all in code with the Codable straight to the bare bone framework of URL session. We have used no pods and have done no abstraction whatsoever beyond our generic code. If you want, we can move on and see what Moya looks like. Or maybe we can attach that to a collection view or a table and see how that would work. What's our next step? What do we want to do? What's that? Moya, okay.
If there's time, I'd like to see Moya too, but I wonder if you could just commit this so I can think about this.
Yeah, let's commit this. It's a good comment. Okay. Now this is not very clean. This is not production yet. Don't submit it to Apple before we're done. Okay. Create meetup API and model objects. Okay. Push to remote. Let's push it. Very cool. Okay, now I'm going to do something else. We're talking about Moya. Anybody else has ideas about what we want to do, what we want to focus on our first app?
First we want to branch, no?
What's that?
We don't want to branch.
We would, since this project is not shared yet, nobody's working on it, we're okay. But let's talk about that. So when you work with other people, I'm not talking about open source, in your team, you don't want to have everybody commit to master. Master is a holy branch. You know what? I'm even going to show you how you make it, keep it holy. Go to github.com. Let's find where are you? SwiftCoders. There you are. Let's go to our repo, branches, and gonna protect master. There you are, master. Nobody can push to master anymore. We can't force push it. We can't pull request reviews. I don't know, maybe. What's an open source project? I don't know what they usually set up. But nobody can push to it besides administrators. And We don't have any status checks yet. And okay, let's just save that. So now our master branch is protected. That means nobody can force push to it to destroy the branch and change its history. You can't delete it, and nobody can modify it while everybody else is working on it. What we're going to have to do is use an approach called Git flow. We're going to create a new branch called develop, and this is where our engineers are going to merge all of their changes. So when you work at a team, you create your own feature branches, rebase or merge them onto develop, and then when you're done and all your features are ready, you will generate a build or create an app from a release branch and merge it to master. That means the only time you merge to master is after you release an app. Master is the source of truth. It represents what's in the App Store. It always shows you the last version of your app, not the last version of your code. Everything in develop is the last updated, tested, and stable version of your code. You don't merge to develop before you test your feature branch and make sure you didn't break anything. Then you merge it to develop, knowing that everything passed, everything is cool, and you can build an app from that branch. Any questions about Git flow? I haven't really dug into it too much. I gave you the highlights. But that's usually how teams work. That's how you avoid stepping on each other's toes, having merge conflicts, or having people modify a branch. And then when you try to push to it, you're not looking at the latest version anymore. Then you have to update whatever you have on your computer. You might lose your changes. It's really not safe to have a lot of people working on the same branch. So just don't do that.
So, how would you handle this scenario? So, as I understand, you have a master branch, which is a copy of the production version, and you have develop branch, which is where people, when they branch from the develop branch, they're adding things to that, testing it, and when that's ready for production, you then would release that into production, and then merge it to the master, right? At what point do you merge to the master?
Me personally, after you submit to the Apple and get approved.
So once it's approved,
That's me. Anybody can make up their own.
okay, so what happens, let's say you've done that, you've merged your develop branch to the master.
You don't merge your develop branch, you merge your release branch.
Okay, so your master remains untouched.
Yes.
So you merge it to a release branch. So you have a release branch and a develop branch.
Yes.
Okay, so you never, at what point do you update your master?
When you release to the App Store, you merge your release branch into master.
Okay, so now let's say you've got, it's in the App Store and then an outlier bug shows up. That's serious. How do you recover for that?
You fix the bug, merge it, and that's it.
You what?
You merge the solution into master and release your app. What do you mean recover? What is the question?
So there's no way to back out of the...
You do not back up on master. You can back up on develop,
So
and
at that point, your only option is to fix it and hope that the fix doesn't cover anything else.
you can check out an older release. You tag your releases, you can check it out, generate a new release from it, because you have to change your release number. Apple doesn't let you go back. It means you have to submit another app with a new number. So there's no point for you to go back because Apple doesn't let you go back anyway. So what you could do is take the old code, commit it.
Refix it and release it.
Exactly. Commit, make another commit with the new version number and generate another app and submit it to the App Store.
So masters are kind of ratchet. You're only going forward.
Master always goes forward. It includes your bugs too. If your bugs made it to production, then master contains your bugs. Yes.
So you got your developer branch, you send it up to the new build tied to.
What's that again?
You got your developer branch,
Yes.
that's what's in, then when you wanna test it out by sending it up to TestFlight as a result branch.
So you don't use develop to generate builds. You use develop to accumulate all the work that other engineers did. At some point when you're ready, you're gonna branch off of develop and you're gonna create a release branch. Release 1, release 2, release 2.5. And from your release branch, you generate an app to TestFlight.
So the release branch goes up as a new build to TestFlight?
Yes, the release branch is where you generate an archive and submit it to TestFlight. Exactly. And there's also something called a hotfix. If you find a bug, you can't fix that bug on the develop branch because develop has moved on. It has new code that was created that you're not ready to put into the App Store. When you want to fix a critical bug, you want to fix it from master. So you would branch off of master and fix your bug into a hotfix. That branch would be called a hotfix. And that hotfix will go back into master. So develop moves forward with code that you might have not tested, with code that 5, 10, 15 different people have committed. You don't want to fix your bug on that code because who knows what else is hiding in there. So when you have a critical bug you want to fix, you take it out from master and create your hotfix from there. Does that make sense? Keep master safe and clean because this is the only copy of your app out there. If you destroy master, you lost your code. There's not a lot that you could do to recover when your Git repository is gone. So make sure you don't touch master or put anything buggy into it until it's ready to go to the App Store. Okay, so we talked a little bit about Git. Any other topics we want to cover, or should we spend the next 5-10 minutes looking at what Moya looks like? Moya. Okay, let's do Moya. Moya's easy. So what I'm going to do here, Meetup API. Let's create a new one for Moya. Let's call it Meetup API 2. Why 2? I don't know. Because we have one. Okay. We'll import Moya and create a enum, and we'll call it Meetup API 2. API 2. And it has two cases: get groups and a case that says get events. And the get events needs a group or group name. So I'm going to make it take a meetup group here. So what we're doing here with Moya, we're creating an enum that represents all the different endpoints. We built them as static functions before. Now they're going to be cases in our enum. And to make those translate into API calls, we're going to make our Meetup API conform to a Moya type called target type. I'm going to build it. I'm going to get an error here. It says it doesn't conform. You're missing some functions in there. I'm just going to hit fix here. Come on. Oh, bam. It did it all for me. So, this is not what I want. Fix it. These are not stubs. Okay. Where is it? I did? Oh, okay. Sorry. My bad. Glad you guys are here. Somebody said extension. I heard you. There we go. Good call. Okay. So, our Meetup API v2 is now conforming to Moya. That means Moya does all the work we did before with generics, with parsing our JSON and doing all that magic for us. All we have to do is tell it how to do it. We don't have to write the code. We just got to tell Moya how to use that that logic that we created, how to use that logic to make API calls for us. So I'm going to look at this just to borrow the information that we had. Moya requires a base URL as well. So I'm going to put that base URL here, return it from Moya, and a path is our endpoint. So every case of the enum that is us is going to need its own endpoint. So let's take those. We have self groups. So we return this one. It's going quickly because we're short on time, but it's gonna be okay. Let's take this thing. Come on. This thing. This is identical. If you're noticing, I'm just copying and pasting. First of all, that means our code was structured so well. We don't really have to do a lot to make it work with Moya. But it also means Moya is very sophisticated, that it doesn't require more information than what we initially used. What's going on here is Moya.method. It's asking me what type of HTTP call that is. So now we only have gets, so I'm just going to return gets. But what we would want to do is switch on self, and then for every one of those, we would want to return the appropriate HTTP method. So we only have two cases. I'm just going to keep it simple. You can just comment it out or return get or build it cleanly for the future. Sample data, right now I don't care about that. That's for unit testing. Important, but not right now. Push it down to the end. And task. So a task is two things. Moya calls a task the type of URL task that we did to make the call. So we had a data task here. You can have an upload, we can have a download, we can have multiple kinds of tasks. Right now we're only getting data back. We're not sending any parameters with post, so we can keep our tasks simple. Let's see what kind of requests we have here. So we have requests with data if we want to send data to the server, if we want to send a JSON to the server, if we want to send parameters, which you're probably going to use a lot, if you want to send parameters in a post. But we're not doing that, so we're just going to keep it plain for now, because that's all we need. But when the time comes and we want to send data or download data or upload files, all that stuff is going to be controlled in the task. With the same mechanism we did before, I'm just going to put it in the default so that our code is future-proof. Sorry? That's, we're going to get to it. We need to edit. I'm actually not sure how we're going to do it. We'll see. But we need to add that API key to all of our requests. I'm not sure how we're going to do it yet. Moya lets you override something, so we could explore it together and figure it out. Because I haven't done that in a while. Headers. We don't need to send anything. You could use a content. You could send the content type. For example, you could do content type JSON application, right? Something like that. But we don't have to send that because it defaults to it. So we can just return nil here, and we're good to go. What am I missing?
Moya methods
One of the switches, I didn't close it, this one, right, cool. Okay, so API key. Now I'm gonna call it, it's not gonna work because we're missing the API key. So let's look at the Moya documentation and see what Moya says. This is how people write code. We don't know everything, we gotta go and learn. So, where's their docs? Docs, let's see what Moya says about API key. Do they have anything here? Authentication, let's see what they say. Basic, we don't do basic. Access token auth. Access token. We don't do bear. Does that help us? I don't know. No. Open auth. I don't think that helps us. So what we need to do is find a way to attach the API key every time we make a request. Can we do it in the provider? So Moya, let's look at this. We just created a target. A target is the API, the URL that we're going to call. And for each target, there's an endpoint. That's a specific place that's the get groups, the get events, that endpoint. And after you create the endpoint, you combine those two parts, you set up more information and make a animal fire request. So we need to interject at some point, maybe the endpoint, I think, and figure out how to add our API key. So we're going to look at the documentation for endpoint and see if there's a place for us to, I see you can add headers here. I wonder if we can manipulate the URL itself. So I'm looking. That's a header field. That would be nice if we could send it in the header. I don't know, the Meetup API is not that sophisticated. Request mapping. I see here is a URL request, so maybe we can inject it over here. So for example, this is where an engineer would go and do some research and play with code and realize that sometimes Stack Overflow is your best friend. What we could do, we could cheat just so we could check that our code works, and we can send our API. It's not actually API, it's key. Let's find our API key somewhere here. Where are you? Photo, there you are. So I'm gonna cheat now because I don't know how to solve this problem. If anybody figures it out, let me know. So what Moya did for us is let us define just the metadata, just the basics of what we need to make an API call, and it will do the rest for us. Now the last part is to create a provider. So let's create a provider, static provider. This is how Moya works. Let's call it Moya provider that takes a generic type. It's going to be a meetup API number 2. I'm going to initialize it. And now let's see if it works. Let's open our view controller up here and do meetup API number 2 dot provider dot quest target, and that's the enum we just set up. Autocomplete is a little shaky. Great, groups completion. Now that's what Josh was talking about. That's a result type. Moya is already doing that work for us. We did not handle errors. We did not bother to even look at them. But if our HTTP response is different than 200, somewhere in the range between 200 and 300, we know it's good. But if it's different, then something happened. Even though we get data back, our request still failed for some reason. If it's a 404, we made a request that goes to an unknown or invalid API point, We still get data back. It's not failing, the internet's still working, but we didn't get what we wanted. So Moya does all that work for us. And it lets us test the different variables of different response types to help us understand what the problem was. So when we get back the result, we know that that something went wrong without having to extract data ourselves from, let's see, case. So success, let response, or failure, let error. So it gave us the error back. Now let's see what the response. It also lets us map it to the decodable object that we want without having to create whatever we did before. So if we get a response back, we know that we can try to map it. And that's also a place for us to wrap Moya and maybe add some of our own code onto it. Make it more generic because only we know what we want to do with the response. So here we're getting a meetup groups array. And if it fails, we could do that. And we can print it just so we can see if it works. Okay, so we created Moya. It took us, I don't know, less than 10 minutes. And now I can run it and see what that looks like. See if our API key hack worked. Don't do that, but I just did. So, groups, let's parse groups. Did we get anything? We get a nil back. So, something broke. I don't know, let's look at the response object. 401, yeah, something's off. We could look at the data. We could take a string. Oh, come on. String data. Oh, there we go. UTF-8, and we could look at what we get back from the server. Oh. We got auth failed, invalid API key. So maybe I used the wrong API key. Let's check that. Let's go back here. Meetup API. Let's copy this thing. No, I put the right one. So, well, I don't know. Something else is breaking. It's a good opportunity.
The documentation it recommends to send parameters and tasks blah blah. So we can send it in the task.
In the task as a parameter? Well,
Yes.
we could try. I don't know if that's going to work. Let's see. Maybe that's it's going to solve it. Where is it?
Yeah,
Meetup number 2. Let's try it. I'm open to suggestions.
yeah,
So,
no request plan. I mean,
yeah, let's try it. That's not a bad idea. So, in the data task, instead of this,
request parameters.
let's try. Maybe it'll encode it. That's not a bad idea. Let's see. Parameters. So, I'm going to put the key here. It takes a dictionary of parameters. So, I'm going to put this here. And then this is URL encoding dot query. We can try the default. Let's see if that works. And then let's remove. Did I not close it? That's true. There we go.
Actually, from previous one, it seems like it didn't put it to the events.
I don't know. Let's try it. That's the thing about this class. I haven't prepared anything. We're doing it all live right now. Did it work? Nope. Let's look at the response. And let's look at the request from this response. It can tell me what the API was. This was the API. So this one works.
And the status is 100.
There we go. So why didn't we get any groups back? What's that?
Don't you need to advance?
Image mapping. Oh. Why do I get an image mapping error? What is that? I didn't even know we have an error object here. No, we don't have an error object. That's just weird. Okay, so this one doesn't work. But what we could do is we could do catch it, and we could print the error. So this is why it's important to handle your errors. Print error. There we go. So let's see what happens. Let's see. Object mapping. What is your problem? Key not found. Okay. So we need to change something in our code that I forgot to do. Yes. Let's do that. So what we're doing here is we're using Moya's default encoder or decoder, which is just an empty one. But we want to map with our own specific encoder. So let's find the function that lets us do this. There we go. So we're going to take this using and put our own decoder. There we go. So hopefully using and meetup API number 1. Okay, let's just copy it over. Get a little dirty. Okay, there we go. So we need a decoder that knows how to work with our types. That's exactly what we were missing. So I'm going to do the same thing here. But this time I'm not going to make it private. What we would want to do is take whatever Moya gave us for free and wrap it as well. Create another layer on top of Moya. So that we don't have to send our, because this should not be going on here. This needs to happen on the API level. We don't want to be using this every time we make a call. So we would want to take this request and put it in another function. So Moya created the base infrastructure for us. What it did is take whatever we wrote here and abstract it for us. And this is simple. This is only going to work for the most plain case that we have right now. We don't handle post, we don't handle delete, we don't handle upload, download. Moya has it all built in. So maybe in this case, it doesn't save us much code. But if our API was more sophisticated, and it probably will be because you're not going to build an app with 2 API calls, you would want to use something that saves you all this code. So I'm going to call this again with the new decoder and see if it works. Let's put a breakpoint and see where it goes. Nice, we get our groups. Sweet. So good call on using the parameters there. And we get both of our groups. So now what we would want to do is wrap this somehow in another kind of generic function and make sure that our generic function performs this mapping the same way we did before. Only that now, instead of using URL session and having to resume a task and do a lot of work, not much, but do a lot of work that we should not be doing ourselves, Moya does that for us. Moya will take the error, show it to us, let us parse the object, and in a very clean and formatted way, it lets us add more calls. We don't have to create a new function. All we have to do is add another case here. So let's get RSVPs, for example, right? And this will take a meetup event. I'm making it up. Maybe we do have that, but this is all you have to do to make sure you support another API. Just go ahead and put the endpoints here. And if you create this as a default, let's say your default is always get, you don't even have to worry about that. We did the same here. And it took me 2 lines of code to add another API call. So this is what Moya does for us. If we look at their website, they have a, where is it? They have a chart that shows how Moya is abstracted on top of Alamo Fire. What they're missing here actually is URL session, which is another layer of abstraction. So URL session sits underneath Alamo Fire. And if you use Alamo Fire, you save yourself the URL session code, but you're not really saving yourselves the code that handles making API calls and making network calls and parsing and doing all those things. Moya abstracts another layer on top of that. And then right here in between, you would create your own abstraction that deals specifically with the data that you want to handle on top. And the nice thing about Moya is you don't access Alamo Fire anymore. You don't access URL session. You don't need to know how it's working. You just need to know that it works. Okay, done talking about Moya. I am not going to commit this to develop because this is a little broken and a little ugly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new branch with my name on it. And I'm going to call it Moya. And I'm going to push this branch. Let's commit it first. Add, what do we call it? Meetup API 2 with Moya. I'm going to push that. And now we have these 2 new files. Always commit the project, by the way, because that project also contains a reference to that file you just added. Make sure you make small commits on your project files, because if you have a conflict here, you can destroy your entire project. Commit and push, and now you can all see my code again. Okay, I think we're done for today. It was pretty basic, I know. This is just the first class. We're going to start doing more sophisticated things. I actually don't really know how to deal with a lot of open source stuff. So we're going to learn together how to fork, how to make changes, push them back, create a pull request, and interact with open source projects as well. Does anybody have any questions? The gentleman in the back.
I'm sure it's mentioned in the meetup, but what's the GitHub repo?
It's SwiftCoders. SwiftCoders / SwiftCoders app. So my plan, and this is just a vision, is to create an app for our meetup group where we could go and see what events are coming for each of the meetups. In the future, instead of this sign-in chart, which I hope everybody signed in, instead of this chart, we're going to do it in the app. And we can keep track of how many people show up. It can help us plan our meetups better, understand what the level of knowledge is, so we can direct our meetups towards whoever is coming, and maybe in the future add more functionality to the app. Whatever you guys want. This is our app. We get to do whatever we want, and if we make it look good enough and it works, we can submit it to TestFlight and eventually to the AppStore together, right here on stage. So if we want it to happen, I need you all to go fork it and start putting code into it. Yes?
And like, are we going to have to just send a request to you for access, or?
No, it's a public,
Okay, it's public.
it's a public repo. So what you need to do is fork it.
Yeah.
Well, I can't fork my own, that's the problem. I wish I had another login. But what you do is you go to the repo and, well, there's no fork because I own it. Let's go to something else. Let's see.
And then, do you have anything on there to protect people from just like committing garbage to the developer branch? Or?
Well, nobody can commit anything to an open source repo. You need to fork it. Unless you're an admin or you're invited to the group, you have to fork it, commit it to your own fork. A fork is basically a copy of the repo with your account. And what you do with this copy is you create a pull request. I don't want to do it now, but we should do it in the next class. Create a pull request and have somebody else that have admin privileges merge your code. Yes?
Oh, yeah, I was adding comments about that, so we're going to put the final today, so I was.
Yeah, well, we're going to need to log in with a different account, or I could go to a different open source project and show you what a fork looks like, but I can't fork my own. So, I don't know, let's look at stars here. CocoaPod keys. Okay, whatever that is. What we could do is fork it. I could create a fork. Let's find something that I want to fork. Rx gesture. Interesting. So I could fork Rx gesture into my own account. It is literally copying over the repo and putting it under my name. So I have my own copy of this repo forked from the Rx Swift community. Now I can go update whatever I want. It's not going to affect anyone but me. And eventually I can create a new pull request. Well, I haven't changed anything. Let's go change. Where's the README file? Let's change the README file. Edit. Usage. Seems like an important change. Where do I save? Commit changes. Update README. Commit. Okay. Bam. Oh, look what I did. I ruined it. Now, I go here, and I create a pull request. Bam. Now this will send it back to somebody in the Rx Swift community. And this is what you need to do and send it to me. And I can merge those changes. We have to, I don't know how to do it, we're going to learn. Integrate CI, some automation that tests our code to make sure that your commits are not breaking it. We could, it's not doing it here, but some repos have a CI connected to them, and they show the status of those. They create unit tests, we should do as well. Let's see if that has it. No. We need to find like Moya. Maybe. Where is Moya? Moya. There we go. Does Moya have it? There we go. Build passing. I don't know how to do it, but we can integrate Circle CI, set up whatever automation we want, and have our commits tested or our pull requests tested so that we don't commit bugs into our code. That's another step in working with open source projects that I need to learn how to do as well. Okay. Any more questions before we sign out?
Yeah, so if we have follow-up questions to ask, we do it in the Slack? Or?
Slack, Twitter, sure. Let me see if there's, you can find me on Twitter. You can create a pull request on GitHub. I can respond to you. Yeah, Slack works too. Anywhere you can reach me, that works. If you put it on Slack, you're probably gonna get answers from a lot more people than just me. Yeah, I know Josh there is very active. Brian as well.
Zero to AppStore channel on SwiftCoders.
Yes, I created a channel for this as well. So if you want to talk about something specifically with this course or our app, feel free to do it over there as well.
What's the Slack channel?
Slack. E-Man, how do we get them on Slack? Good question. Oops, I killed my.
Messages on meetup with my email, and then we'll add you to this question.
Yeah, we'll find SwiftCoders, Slack.com. There has to be a way to invite people, right?
It's on the meetup page.
It's on the meetup page. Okay, we can find it. We'll figure it out. Okay, last chance. Questions? No. Cool. Okay, thank you for coming. I hope you learned something. I hope the more advanced ones did not get completely bored. I wanted you here to help us out because I don't know everything, and I'm looking for more people to present because I'm not going to be able to teach you everything because I don't know everything. So if you know something, and you're good at it, and you're good at presenting, come talk to me and we can set up a session. You could do it here, you could do it at your company, we can figure it out. Okay? I'll see you all next time, and have a good night.